realm of politics. In politics, you can ignore evidence. You can say, oh no, you can invent your own reality. You can live in a bubble. But in science, it's not allowed.
Is that what you think your colleagues are doing, though? Because they would probably say the same thing about your analysis.
No. They did pay attention to the evidence. Okay, I'm saying you're not allowed to ignore it. So they didn't ignore it. What did they propose as an explanation for the evidence? Okay, so there were about half a dozen papers trying to explain it. Okay, so first there was a group of people that said, we know it's natural, period. And that was published in a very prestigious journal, Nature Astronomy. So a group of experts came together and announced that it must be natural. So then everyone said, okay, well, if these experts say that, it must be. Wait a second. And then a few months later, a team suggested, oh, well, but there is this push. How do we explain it? So then they said, well, maybe it's a hydrogen iceberg, a chunk of frozen hydrogen. We've never seen anything like it before. It cannot be produced in a system like the solar system. It must have been produced in a completely different setup, like a molecular cloud or something. We've never seen it, but it's a chunk of frozen hydrogen the size of a football field and gets evaporated, and then we don't see the hydrogen because it's transparent. So I worked out with a colleague of mine showing that it would evaporate very quickly, because hydrogen evaporates quickly, and it wouldn't survive the journey. So the authors of this paper agreed with us and said, okay, well, that's a problem. So then another group said, maybe it's a cloud of dust particles, 100 times less dense than air. So it's very fluffy, and when it reflects sunlight, it gets pushed. The problem with that is when it gets close to the sun, it will not maintain its integrity, it will disintegrate. So then a third team, three months later, and just to remind you, all of this came after the first group of experts said it must be natural. Now, if it was obvious that it's natural, why did all the others have to invent all kinds? Anyway, so the third group said, oh, it's a nitrogen iceberg. A chunk of a chip of frozen nitrogen that was chipped off the surface of a planet like Pluto. So then we wrote a paper showing that if you take all the solid nitrogen in Pluto-like planets in the Milky Way galaxy, you just don't get enough chips to explain a big enough population that would account for Oumuamua. But anyway, all of these possibilities by the mainstream, people that didn't ignore the evidence, all of them invoke a rock of a type that we've never seen before. So to me, it reminds me of cave dwellers that are used to playing with rocks. And when they see a cell phone, they would say the cell phone is a rock of a type that we've never seen before, right? And how would they find that it's not a rock? By pressing a button that records their voice. So my point is, this is intriguing enough for us to collect more evidence. Rather than saying it's natural, period, let's move on, we should say it's intriguing, let's collect more data on the next Oumuamua. And, it's just like dating. We want to, in the Galileo project that I lead, we want to rendezvous with the next Oumuamua. And there is a dating app. It's called the Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile that will start operations in a year. And it will identify many more objects like Oumuamua. Most of the time we will swipe to the left.
Love the analogy, yeah, powerful.
Yeah, I mentioned it yesterday in front of 800 women, and they laughed.
Yeah,
they laughed.
Good.
I'm always warned by my daughters and my wife not to make jokes about dating.
Oh, that's your specialty, as far as I'm aware.
So I don't listen to them because I do get applause.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the point is that every now and then we'll see a weird object like Oumuamua, and we would like to come close to it to get a photograph. Because, as I said, we should pay attention to evidence, especially if it's intriguing, rather than dismissing it.
Right.
The reason that experts on space rocks want everything in the sky to look like a space rock and be natural is because they base their reputation on studies of space rocks, and they don't want anything new. One of them, there was a lecture about Oumuamua at Harvard, and when I left the room, he told me, Oumuamua is so weird, I wish it never existed.
Well, you know, that's not unusual in scientific community. Whenever there's been huge breakthroughs, there's always people who are resistant to, you know, adjusting their worldview, and that
But
happens
this
every
is a
time,
major.
right?
This is a major adjustment. I think
Yeah.
it would be the most important discovery of humanity, because just think about the implications. You know, like suppose we find a gadget that represents our future that will take us 1,000,000 years to develop. It would look like magic. An advanced extraterrestrial civilization that has science much more developed than we developed so far, you know, they could look like God because they can create life in their laboratories. They could create a baby universe in their lab. You know, I sometimes think that maybe the Big Bang was created by a scientist in a white coat somewhere.
Is that a simulation theory or
No,
just
okay. So I
like
should.
a small universe within a larger universe theory?
Well, in physics, simulations are generated on a computer. Okay?
Yeah.
So they're not real in the sense that they do, you know, it's like living in the metaverse. You can have neighbors in the metaverse. You can always look nice in the metaverse. But it's not the reality that we all share. It's like taking drugs. You live in your own thing, in your own world. And there is something to be spoken about the reality we all share, because if we pay attention to that reality, not to the simulation or simulated reality, we can adapt to it. You know, we can, like, if we realize that the climate is changing, we can do things, you know, that will mitigate that. If we realize that a pandemic is caused by a virus, we can do something about it. You know, so knowing what reality is like, even if it's not flattering your ego, you know, it's just like looking at the mirror and seeing what is really out there, rather than living in the metaverse where you look like Brad Pitt all the time. You know? And so I think it's always good for us to get a sense of reality, and the way to do it is by collecting data and evidence, and that's what we should be doing all the time.
What are the chances that Oumuamua, do you think, is of alien origin? Have you crunched that? Could
I
you
think
possibly say?
it's definitely very weird, and the same is true for the first 2 interstellar meteors. So my goal is to get more data and make sure, you know, that we understand the.
Do you have a hunch, though? You have a feeling one way, or you just want to find out?
Yeah, but you know, out of modesty, I don't think that we are the pinnacle of creation. I don't think, you know, I think that we are sort of in the middle of our class of intelligent civilization. You know, when I teach at Harvard, I tell the undergraduates on the first day, I say, half of you in the class are below the median. And they get upset because all the students that get to Harvard think that they're the smartest. But it's a statistical fact that, you know, the median is always in the middle, and half of the class is always behind, you know, below it. So it's a statistical fact that in every class, irrespective of who is in the class, half of the class is below the median. And I think of humanity in the same way. I think that it's very unlikely that we are sort of the best that was ever created. And therefore, we should be modest and just try to learn from our neighbors, rather than argue that there is nobody out there, we are the smartest. You know, for centuries, we argued that we are at the center of the universe. You know, Aristotle argued that, and people believed him, the church believed him. And the reason was simple, because it flattered our ego to think that we are at the center. Then we realized, no, we are on Earth, the Earth moves around the sun moves around the center of the Milky Way, and the Milky Way is just one out of 1 trillion galaxies like it in the universe that is expanding. And so we are not at the center of stage, okay? And then we realized, oh, we just came at the end of a very long cosmic play, you know, that lasted for 13.8 billion years since the Big Bang. So if you arrive to a play just at the end of the play, and you are not at the center of stage, the play is not about you. As much as you want to think that you are central, like all, you know, humans, people think that we are really important, we are not. And in order for us to find more about what the play is, we should seek other actors, because they may have been around and they may know what the play is about.
It seems that you're, I would say, looking over your kind of career and your work and your focus, at least recently, you seem to have a large emphasis on the search for extraterrestrial life. I want to throw you, you say that's accurate. Right?
Recently, in the last 5 years. Before that, I worked on black holes, you know, these extreme structures of space and time that it's the ultimate prison. If you fall into them, you can never check out. By the way, I spoke about them to a class of my daughter when she was young, and then one of the kids asked me, what will happen to my body if I fall into a black hole? So I explained, I said, look, as you get close to the so-called singularity at the center, the tide on your body, you know, your legs will be pulled much more than your head and you will be torn apart. At which point the teacher said, stop speaking about it because they would have nightmares. So, but there is this fascination with black holes. So I worked on black holes. I worked also at on the scientific version of the story of Genesis, you know, how the first light was produced in the early universe.
Right. Yeah. So I want to ask you about that stuff. But first I want to, Stephen Hawking, I think before he passed, shortly before he said a lot of stuff about the search for aliens being a bad idea. And I'll read you a quote that you can respond to. He said, we don't know much about aliens, but we know about humans. If you look at history, contact between humans and less intelligent organisms has often been disastrous from their viewpoint, and encounters between civilizations with advanced versus primitive technologies have gone very badly for less advanced. The civilization reading one of our messages could be billions of years ahead of us. If so, they will be vastly more powerful and may not see us as any more valuable than we see bacteria.
Okay, I respectfully disagree, but I should first clarify that in April 2016, Stephen Hawking came to my home for Passover dinner and gave a speech. That was the year when I was the founding director of the Black Hole Initiative at Harvard, so we just established it. And also we announced the Breakthrough Starshot project, which is an initiative to launch a spacecraft that would reach the nearest star in our lifetime. Okay? So he came to celebrate both events and came to my home, and it was a wonderful experience to host him for 3 weeks. But on this, I disagree with him because just think about it. We had our science and technology over the past century. Okay, so quantum mechanics, for example, that we use in our gadgets, in your cell phone, you know, that we use in this recording, it's all, you know, all of the gadgets that we are using are based on quantum mechanics. Okay, we discovered quantum mechanics only 100 years ago. It was not known before that, and so all the advances in modern science and technology came about over the past century. And that's 1 part in 100 million of the age of the Earth, or the Sun. Okay? So that means that the chance of us meeting another civilization exactly at the same phase as we are is really small. 1 part in 100 million, okay? And most likely they would either be much more primitive than we are or much more advanced. Because, you know, for a few million years, we were just not very sophisticated. So to find the more primitive ones, like we were 1 million years ago, you have to launch a spacecraft, board it, and then land on another planet, and then start searching through the trees for those primitive tribes that represent our past. That's very tedious. I don't think we will ever do that, okay? To find the more advanced civilizations, you don't need to do anything except look out, because they would reach you by now. And that's what I'm advocating for. Let's check. So my point about Stephen Hawking's sort of risk assessment is, if they are much more advanced than we are, and sort of like a technological gap, so mind the gap. If they are much more advanced than we are, it's just like a biker going down the sidewalk. The biker doesn't care about ants in the cracks of the pavement, you know? So, you know, we might think that we are important, we are central, we are like the ants. We might decide about a protocol, how to engage with the biker, and what the biker would do to us, and so forth. But the biker doesn't care less, because these ants are so primitive, they don't pose a risk to the biker. So the biker just drives through.
Wasn't that kind of his point, though? He says they may not see us as anything more valuable than we see bacteria. I remember one of his concerns that he wrote about was that, you know, because they see us as so primitive, they would perhaps come to our planet, harvest our minerals, our resources, right? Perhaps use our planet's resources to build more probes, because that's kind of like, you know, the Borg from Star Trek or whatever.
Yeah, they could be self-replicating
yeah, they
probes.
just, you know.
By the way, if they are functional, they would probably have artificial intelligence, because we are now on the cusp of artificial intelligence taking over humans.
Yeah.
And in our future, that probably will be the case. And I think that our AI systems would have kinship to their AI systems more than to us in the future.
Yeah, okay.
And we will use our AI systems to tell us. They will be the interpreter. Just like, you know, Alan Turing during the Second World War, he developed Enigma to figure out the code of the Nazis. And he was using computers for that, and people mainly. In the future, we could use our AI systems in the same way.
So you don't share any of those apprehensions that he did?
Not at all. I think we will benefit from an interaction because we will learn from them if we are open-minded. If we don't declare ourselves as superior to start with, you know, that's the alpha male approach. That will not be smart. By the way, we don't have a protocol how to deal with a visitor to our backyard. In the past, people said, what will happen if we detect a radio signal? But it takes, you know, tens of thousands of years for a radio signal to arrive to us from a distant star within the Milky Way galaxy. So it was thought that we have plenty of time to think about it. But if you have a visitor just next to you, you have to respond immediately. And there is no organization that represents humanity right now. And frankly, I'm worried about some crazy guy even if there is an organization, someone in the periphery will do something crazy and engage with anything. But as I said, I'm not worried because I think any gadget would be far more advanced than we can develop, and we'll know how to deal with it.
It seems that when you're thinking about extraterrestrials visiting the planet, you're not talking about UFOs and little green there's aliens walking off the ship. It seems like we're talking about probes and exploratory tools that an advanced civilization would be sending out.
Well, it's
into the
interesting
galaxy.
to ask what would be their purpose, what would be their goal, because, you know, that will affect how they interact with us. By the way, if you go back 100 years, there was a very famous philosopher, Martin Buber, Jewish philosopher, and he talked about the interaction of humans with objects. He called it the I-it interaction, the interaction of humans with humans, I-you, or with God, which is the sort of ultimate you, okay? But he never imagined AI systems. And so we are now entering a new era where humans are interacting with AI systems, you know, the self-driving cars, or, you know, whenever you Google, you interact with an AI system. That's a new interaction, a human AI system. What I'm talking about is there will be another phase transition when AI systems will interact with each other. And by the way, they may ridicule us at that point because we would be much more inferior. And they might develop their own language. And then finally, it will be our AI systems with AI astronauts. These are systems that were sent to us from another place.
Right.
And that's the way I see it, because, you know, humans evolved by Darwinian evolution, you know, natural selection on Earth. We can't survive in space. It's really difficult. I mean, Elon Musk wants to die on Mars. I think
you don't see it. You don't. That's the second time I've heard you kind of take a jab at Elon. What, do you not believe in his whole mission of colonizing Mars?
No, I think he's visionary. I think, but I do think that the risk to the human body was not studied enough.
Right.
When he advocates for humans to be there, you know, you really need to find a solution for what to do with the cosmic rays.
Right.
And a human cannot survive more than a few years exposed to this. You need to put some shielding. So you can go into caves. So it's sort of like, you know, we started in caves on Earth for a different reason, because it provided protection from the rain, from storms, or the wind. But when we go to